Imagine a city reduced to rubble, where every street corner, every building, every room is a battlefield. This isn't a scene from a movie. This was Stalingrad in 1942. For 200 days and nights, two of the most powerful armies in history, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, were locked in a brutal, citywide deathmatch. This wasn't just a battle. It was a turning point that would decide the fate of World War II. So what made Stalingrad the meat grinder of the Eastern Front? And how did this single battle shatter the myth of German invincibility? Stick around as we dive deep into one of the most epic and harrowing sieges in all of human history. To understand Stalingrad, we have to rewind to the summer of 1942. Operation Barbarossa, Hitler's invasion of the Soviet Union, had stalled outside Moscow the previous winter. Now, he needed a new plan. He launched Operation Blue, a massive offensive aimed at the oil fields of the Caucasus in the south. Securing these oil fields was crucial for the German war machine. But standing in the way was a city on the Volga River, a major industrial hub named after the Soviet leader himself, Stalingrad. For Hitler, capturing Stalingrad wasn't just a strategic objective. It became a personal obsession, a symbol of his will to crush the Soviet Union. For Stalin, defending it was a matter of national survival and personal pride. The stage was set for a clash of titans. In late August 1942, the German Sixth Army, under the command of General Friedrich Paulus, reached the outskirts of Stalingrad. They were confident, a battle-hardened force that had steamrolled across Europe. The initial assault was devastating. The German Luftwaffe unleashed a relentless bombing campaign, turning much of the city into a fiery inferno. Over 40,000 civilians perished in the first week alone. It seemed like the city would fall in days. The German plan was simple: encircle and annihilate the Soviet 62nd Army defending the city. But they underestimated the sheer tenacity of the defenders and the nature of the battlefield they were about to enter. The battle for Stalingrad quickly devolved from a conventional war of movement into something far more primitive and brutal. The Germans called it Rattenkrieg, or Rat War. Fighting wasn't for miles of territory, but for inches of ground. It took place in the skeletons of factories, in apartment buildings, in sewers, and in cellars. A single building like the famous Pavlov's house could change hands dozens of times a day. Soldiers fought with machine guns, grenades, flamethrowers, and often just their knives and shovels. The front line was everywhere and nowhere. You could be on the top floor of a building controlled by the Soviets, while the Germans held the floor below. Snipers became legendary figures like the famous Soviet marksman Vasily Zaitsev, picking off enemy soldiers one by one from the ruins. Life expectancy for a new soldier at the front was often less than 24 hours. For the Soviet soldiers of the 62nd Army, led by the indomitable General Vasily Chukov, the order was simple: not one step back. Chukov's strategy was to hug the enemy. He ordered his troops to stay as close to the German lines as possible, often just a grenade's throw away. This neutralized the German superiority in air power and artillery, as they couldn't bomb their own men. Ferries braved constant shelling and air attacks to bring reinforcements and supplies across the icy Volga River at night. For these soldiers, every day was a fight for survival, fueled by desperation, patriotism, and a burning hatred for the invaders who had destroyed their homes. They held on, bleeding the German army for every inch of the city. By November, the once mighty German Sixth Army was bogged down. They controlled about 90% of the ruined city, but the final victory remained tantalizingly out of reach. They were exhausted, low on ammunition, and unprepared for the brutal Russian winter that was now setting in. While the Germans were fixated on the urban slaughterhouse, the Soviet High Command, led by Marshal Georgy Zhukov, was quietly preparing a massive counterattack. They had been secretly amassing huge reserves of men and tanks on the flanks of the German army, where the lines were held by weaker Romanian and Italian allied forces. The trap was about to be sprung. On November 19, 1942, the Soviets launched Operation Uranus. In a classic pincer movement, two massive Soviet fronts smashed through the weak Axis flanks to the north and south of Stalingrad. The German commanders were caught completely by surprise. Within just 4 days, the Soviet pincers met at the town of Kalik, west of Stalingrad. The trap was closed. The entire German Sixth Army, nearly 300,000 men, was now encircled, cut off from all supplies. The hunter had become the hunted. General Paulus pleaded with Hitler for permission to break out, but Hitler, in a fit of rage and denial, refused. He promised to supply the Sixth Army by air, ordering them to stand fast and fight to the last man. The German air bridge, or Luftbrücke, was a catastrophic failure. The Luftwaffe simply didn't have enough transport planes, and those they had were easy targets for Soviet fighters and anti-aircraft guns. Only a fraction of the required daily supplies ever reached the beleaguered army. Inside the Kessel, or cauldron, conditions became hellish. The Russian winter, one of the coldest on record, set in with a vengeance. Temperatures plummeted to -30 degrees Celsius. Soldiers froze to death in their foxholes. Food ran out. They ate their horses, then dogs, cats, and rats. Ammunition became scarce. Frostbite, starvation, and disease claimed thousands of lives. The once proud Sixth Army was slowly and agonizingly starving to death. Despite the hopelessness of their situation, the German soldiers continued to fight with grim determination, holding off repeated Soviet attacks. A German relief attempt, Operation Winter Storm, was launched in December but was halted by stiff Soviet resistance, its spearhead never getting closer than 30 miles from the pocket. The last glimmer of hope for the trapped army was extinguished. As January 1943 wore on, the Soviet forces tightened their grip, splitting the German pocket in two. The end was near. On January 31st, a haggard and broken General Paulus, whom Hitler had just promoted to Field Marshal in a bizarre attempt to encourage him to fight to the death, surrendered what was left of his forces in the southern pocket. 2 days later, on February 2nd, the last remnants of the northern pocket also laid down their arms. The Battle of Stalingrad was over. The aftermath was apocalyptic. The city was a wasteland of rubble and corpses. The German Sixth Army had been utterly annihilated. Of the nearly 300,000 men encircled, only about 91,000 were taken prisoner. And of those, fewer than 6,000 would ever see Germany again. The Axis powers had suffered a colossal defeat, losing not just an entire army but also vast quantities of equipment. But the Soviet cost was even greater, with estimates of over 1 million total casualties, including soldiers and civilians. Stalingrad was the single deadliest battle in human history. The impact of Stalingrad was immediate and profound. It was the first time the German army had been forced to surrender on such a scale. The myth of German invincibility was shattered forever. For the Soviet Union, it was a massive morale boost, a symbol of their resilience and eventual victory. Across the world, the news of the Soviet triumph was greeted with a mixture of shock and jubilation. Stalingrad marked the psychological and strategic turning point of the war on the Eastern Front. From this point forward, the Red Army would be on the offensive, beginning the long, bloody road that would eventually lead them to Berlin. The battle proved that the German war machine could be stopped and defeated. It changed the entire dynamic of World War II and, in doing so, reshaped the course of modern history. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey back to the ruins of Stalingrad. It's a stark reminder of the incredible human cost of war and the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable hardship. If you found this video insightful, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to our channel for more deep dives into history. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. We'll see you in the next one.